Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Campus Calling, Organizing for Climate Justice at the University Level. My name is Sumner Lewis. I am the National Organizer for Young People at Dayenu, and I will be moderating this session. And now it's time for our lovely panels to introduce themselves. Emily, would you like to begin?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that, Summer. My name is Emily. I am a master's student at Queen's University in biology studying bioplastics. I am also a youth climate leader with Repair the World and with Hillel, and I'm also really into cycling and reading and climbing and also climate activism. So I'm a co-founding member of Kingston Youth Climate Action, which is a local youth-led climate movement. So we meet once a week, and we've been putting on a bunch of local actions for like in the past few months. So we put together 5 in-person ones and one online. Some of those were the global climate strike that some of you guys might have been at, locally, wherever you were. We've also protested against, big Canadian financial institutions like RBC that are kind of outsized in funding the climate crisis. And locally, we put together a campaign to lobby for changing the Kingston Leadership Climate Plan. So we put that together and we got the city to change its carbon emission reduction targets. So that was pretty cool. And yeah.
Thanks so much, Emily. Madeline, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone?
Of course. Hello, Summer. Thank you so much for moderating. It's really a pleasure to be in this space with such seasoned activists and organizers across space and age and organization and campus. My name is Madeline. I use she, her pronouns. I am a sophomore at Brown and I'm originally from Houston, Texas, where I am currently right now. And I'm the organizing coordinator at JYCM, which means that I oversee a lot of our campaigns and work with our middle and high school leadership board members to take action and to recruit up a base so that we can organize and do these actions on a multi-generational level. My background in climate organizing comes from the city that I grew up in. I worked with the Sunrise Movement here. I started a local climate strike organization that became kind of an autonomous climate striking organization called Houston Youth Climate Strike, and have worked on some national sunrise campaign work as well as with the Future Coalition led climate strikes for Earth Day that became, they were going to be in person, they became an online thing. And so my experiences both online and virtual, which we will talk about today.
Thanks, and Bella?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Bella. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Boulder, Colorado, where some really devastating fires just hit. So definitely this topic is close to home right now. Um, and I'm a first year student at UC Berkeley studying society and the environment. I do a lot of work with the Berkeley Hillel Dayenu Circle, as well as I'm an intern or like a fellow for JYCM, Jewish Youth Climate Movement. Um, I do a lot of work with like public programming and educational trainings for students across country as well as locally. In high school, I did a lot of work locally at my school and with my youth group. So that's kind of my background there.
Thanks, everyone. So, all of you mentioned all of these really great actions that you helped plan, participate in. And I think a really big question here, we know that actions are important, but what actually is the role that they hold in climate organizing among young people?
I think when we talk about actions, it's important to understand these things. So, actions exist on a gradient, and when we're talking about actions, we mean all these things. We understand them in different sort of functions, all trying to shift the balance of power. So, sometimes in social movement theory, we talk about things called moral protest, and these are actions that are they qualify something called nonviolent direct action. So they're really targeting the root of they're picking a target that is responsible for a social ill and they're trying to expose that problem on a really visible scale to both the public and the ones who are doing the problem. So when I see actions, the role of it, particularly for young people, is to hold our institutions accountable by exposing some sort of crisis and disrupting a status quo. So it's all about shifting power. In Gen Z, we grew up really accustomed to these actions all around us. We remember a lot of different social movements. So we're talking about the climate crisis here today, but personally, I really remember the moral protest of seeing the students in the gun violence prevention movement strike, organize a bunch of school walkouts in response to gun violence. And it was interesting because you had those walkouts, then you had the climate strikes, and these were targeting students in school. And they were leaving school not because the schools were the problem. The schools didn't have the power to change the laws. The schools were not being unsustainable or perpetuating status quos in which our lives are going to be threatened by the perpetuation of fossil fuels or by the gun violence prevention, by the NRA and those industries there. But they're an institution that's structured in society that students are kind of forced into. So by walking out of school, by striking from school, it was a way of us saying, we are going to disrupt what's normal so that we can change what's normal. What's interesting to me about college campus organizing as well is that it has both that we're just disrupting what's normal because it's our framework, we're on college campuses, but now for the first time, young people are within institutions that themselves actually do have power. So we've seen a lot of protests in which college students are trying to get their universities to divest their endowments from fossil fuels. Those are massive, massive sums of money that absolutely are perpetuating climate change by being invested in fossil fuels. So while actions can be a little bit symbolic in saying what is normal for me, I'm going to push back against, they can also identify institutions directly responsible and say, hey, you, people who have power, but not only people who have power, people that you have power and that I am living in relation to, I am going to strain my relationship in relation to you by exposing what you're doing and how morally incomprehensible it is.
That sounds really applicable to people who want to start and truly see an injustice. Emily, I know that you are a grad student right now. Have you, in your experience on campus life, seen anything where you get to directly go to an institution, the school, and say, hey, we see this injustice. This is what we want to do. This is how we're going to change it. And has it actually changed anything?
So we have, I would say that the best example I have with that is with the climate leadership plan. So essentially, we had put together a few rallies, and then KYCA kind of came together, and we figured like, what is the strongest action that we can have, and like what locally could we have the biggest impact on? And it was this climate leadership plan, which was it's a document that was put together, which is really, really great. Essentially, Kingston got like a group of consultants to see like where they could do better. And their emission targets weren't very good. There wasn't very much room for social justice in there. It was just like, it even had a section saying like, well, advantages of climate change are a longer construction season. And yeah, it was put a little bit more tactfully than that, but, it really wasn't so good. So yeah, we just started, like we've got some mentors in the community, like 350 Kingston and Just Recovery Kingston. And we started talking about what it's like to lobby, what needs to be done. And yeah, we've got a lot of people power. So we started meeting with council people. We started meeting with the mayor. We put together letter writing campaigns. We got a lot of help from all sorts of people. And then we got that changed. And so they're going to amend the climate leadership plan. So I think it's really just a question of finding what around you can do. It seems like climate change is a really existential problem, and we can all kind of feel stuck. I know I've been there before. And it's all about finding what's closest to you and like what are the first steps you can do to start moving towards it.
Yeah, many people, it's heartening to hear these success stories that are happening right now. But how do you begin an action? Let's distill it down to its very first thing. What do you do in the planning process when you see something that you know needs to be changed and you want to do something about it? Where do you start?
So I'm going to bring it back a little bit as to how KYCA started. Essentially, we were just a group of students and people that met up in a backyard, and we started talking about what we thought we could actually do, because to kind of make an impact on the climate crisis, or at least to do something. So the first thing that we did was we followed like 350 Canada's toolkit for the Canada Still on Fire. So there's a lot of people out there who have a lot of climate organizing experience, and they have a lot of resources. So they had a really step-by-step guide that we followed, and that was incredibly helpful. Also reaching out to community groups and people with more experience that knew like where to rent the sound equipment, what it's like, interacting with local law enforcement here, what we need to know. So if you're, I guess, struggling to find a place to start, there's a lot of really good resources and national rallies that have tools. And then otherwise, if you're just trying to figure out, you know, where to start and what to work on, I would start asking around. There's a lot of people that do climate work professionally, or even it's a large part of their life. And so, yeah, just start kind of crowdsourcing, asking around and seeing what is pressing in your community.
So it sounds, oh, Bella, go right ahead.
I was just going to say I agree with that. I think part of climate organizing is it can be really overwhelming. I know, like, I'll sit down with people, like, okay, let's plan something, like, what are we passionate about? What's the problem? And it's just overwhelming. There's just so much to do. There's so many problems, so many issues. And I found that I kind of sitting down and talking about, like, the end goal, less of, like, what we want to accomplish, but more of, like, how we want to feel after. Um, Someone in JYCM kind of has this tradition of visioning where we kind of talk about how we see ourselves in the future and how we want like to accomplish what our goals are, and you can kind of make it like a simple action of like, okay, there's one thing we want to accomplish, and that can kind of like spiral into a bigger action over time as you like identify what that is.
I really like your point about thinking how we want to feel after instead of making this huge lofty goal, because sometimes big lofty goals don't come right when you think they are going to. Can you give an example of a how you feel goal that you've set and if you've reached it?
Yeah. Well, we were planning some campaigns. I think it was our storytelling campaign for JYCM a little while back. And I remember before we did it, we kind of sat back and talking about, what do you want it to look like? How do you want to feel after? And a lot of us were pretty inexperienced at that point, or at least I was. I never planned a campaign. I didn't really know what I was doing. And I just like remember, I think I wrote down, I remember writing, I just want to feel that I've done something, that I've talked to someone, that someone has gone from that point and decided to take action in their own life. I think that's like what fuels me the most in this is like someone else deciding that this is also their passion, or that they're interested in some capacity. I think that's like the best way to kind of make an impact in that way. And I didn't know what a storytelling campaign, like what that was going to entail in the end and how we were going to accomplish every single goal and, the numbers we were going to reach or anything like that. But just thinking about how I was going to feel after, that was something that I really appreciated.
And I think on that note, there is absolutely this affective quality that actions create far more than just the quantitative. And I think it's not just you as the organizer can identify it in yourself, as Bella was explaining, but there's also an ability to just see how the people that you're taking action with, that you're mobilizing, that you're doing this, who are on your organizing team, are responding and how they're feeling. And it's an intuitive quality that you get to understand as you begin to do this work, but you can tell that people are really engaged and there's an energy that really powerful actions take on. And it's really something that I don't know how to express in any sort of words. It is this sort of liveliness, the sense of just simply doing the action feels like it's a creation of hope and a creation of perpetuation. It's almost a ritual. We're sitting here in a Jewish space and we know the power of doing ritual things and having those maintaining tradition and having something just for the sake of how it feels to do something that is really sacred, taking action can have that sacred quality of a ritual because of the power in reacting to the world. And Bella was talking about what it feels like for you as the organizer and you as a team member, and that's so palpable, and it becomes palpable among the participants as well. And if it does, in addition to just feeling it, it's really important to talk to your fellow organizers as well, and to people who come up to them at the action, ask them how they're feeling, what they thought about coming, and what they think of this speech, what they think of this component of the action. Did they feel safe? Did they feel welcome? Are they feeling really energized? Because once you do that, then you can recruit them, and it's really an exciting space to be in.
Yes, the liveliness, the hope, the energy, even the inexperience. It sounds like a lot of climate organizing is really truly about community. So when someone's first starting out, how do you find that community? I know, Madeline, you started off pretty young in the Sunrise Movement. What was your journey from being someone who was interested in climate to being a Sunrise leader?
Yeah, so I was really fortunate to grow up during this moment of this big climate strike moment, and I didn't there wasn't an organizing scene in the city of Houston on climate, and it was really close to home for us all. We were teenagers growing up in a city that was ravaged by three back-to-back 500-year floods, and that means a flood that is statistically slated to happen once in 500 years, and these happen every single year. So we're at a point where the climate crisis has upended our statistics. This is extremely personal to us all. I had friends who were fearful for their homes, afraid every time it rained. They had really um, internalized a sense of climate anxiety and fear. And so for me, I didn't know anyone. I had no idea how to organize. I knew nothing about what I know now. It was a process of just kind of intuiting how do you make those connections. And so it was really, building a community out of recruitment. And what we learned was those shared stories. It was a sense of you began to talk to people, and maybe you made a connection here, maybe made a connection there. Someone might be interested in another school, etc. We were trying to organize across a city, far more complicated than organizing on a college campus, thankfully. But the way that we built that community was through trust in our shared stories. We began to talk to each other and open up and tell each other our stories about what it was to be a teenager in a city of climate change. And we recognized our own stories, our own fears, our own angers, our anguish at our politicians, our own excitement about transforming our own communities, our schools, and our cities, and our hope for what it could be like to really protect our communities. That question of what am I here for? What am I fighting for? What am I trying to save? That's what brought us together as a community. That's how we identified people who might want to join, but it's also what made people want to stick around when it got difficult.
Yeah, that brings us into a really good question about recruitment. So, finding a large community is one thing, but once you're in a community, how do you bring more people into the fold? Emily, I know you're in Canada and you had a really good campaign. How did you find those people who are on the fray to bring them in?
It's really all just talking to people. I live in a small university town, and COVID's shut down a lot of things. So I feel like a lot of communication is almost like bubble to bubble to bubble. And so, as soon as we could go back on campus, I'm a TA, so I would just, show up at the class, on the first day and say, like, hey, like I'm part of this youth climate movement. If anyone wants to join, feel free. And, sometimes you get people, sometimes, word of mouth spreads and you get people joining that way. Likewise, one of our like co-founding members, Stephanie, she just would stand up in her environmental science tutorials and say, like, hey, I'm part of a youth climate movement if anybody wants to join. So it just kind of putting out the feelers and being really, really open, making sure that the barrier to entry was really low. So just if anyone was even a little bit interested, we would throw them in the WhatsApp group, and then they could kind of follow along if they wanted. And then as we started to have our rallies, some of them had, hundreds of people, and you would have people coming up and asking us, how can I get involved? And that's been really, really helpful as well. We only recently made an Instagram for it, which has been helpful. Our strategy used to be like, well, like if you really want to get involved, give me your phone number. I'll invite you to Emily's house on Sunday, kind of thing. But yeah, so it's just kind of like following where kind of the spirit is. And I think, just like Maddie was saying, like talking to people, drawing people in that way. And yeah, I think that people have a hunger for climate action. I think that, most of us are really frustrated with climate change and we want to do something about it. So making these opportunities vocal and making it a fun space is a really great way to just draw people in and kind of ride the wave, I guess.
Bella, do you have any other tips and tricks? I know that Berkeley, you have two different communities going on there, the Dayenu Circle, JYCM, and also California, Northern California, and Berkeley specifically is a very hot button climate area where people seem very into it. How do you find more people to organize with there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like just what you guys were saying, word of mouth is kind of like the most efficient because it's, the most personal. It's not like an email, a text chain. I get a million of those every day and I don't, want to look through all of them. But I have people in my environmental classes that I'll just talk to and kind of ask what they're up to, see if they're interested. And I tend to end up talking to people who are too busy because they have other climate, stuff going on. So that's something I've definitely found is there's a lot of overlap. And I think that's something we're going to try to focus on more is kind of figuring out how people can work together and bring their assets together and their skills because there's a lot of people and they're all very interested. But yeah, that's kind of like the main way I go about it too.
So that brings up the question of once you've found people, once you've gotten them into the fold, how do you keep them to maintain their involvement in the organization, especially in something as climate, where burnout, and on a college campus where so many people are busy with all of the other extracurriculars that they're doing? How do you get them to really stay involved? Emily, you looked like you had something to say about that, and then Madeline.
I think that it's really natural for people's involvement to be cyclical. Sometimes people can do a lot in 1 week or 1 month, but then either they burn out or other commitments come up. So I guess just respecting that everybody has different constraints on their time and sharing responsibility. So if somebody's doing a lot of organizing work, it's great to offer support. And it seems like for us, each action is like there might be one person that kind of heads it a little bit more, and then for the next thing, someone else might take the lead. So there's that, and also when it comes to recruitment and keeping people, just you know, like once again, very little barrier to entry or involvement. If people can do 5 minutes of work, like that would be great. If they can come to a meeting once a month, that's great. But just like keeping it really, really open, and if you have a good atmosphere and people tend to want to get involved more. So, yeah.
I totally agree. And I think also it has to do with, I think, twofold. In addition to bringing those people in and honoring space for them, I think in some senses what I've found, what Bella and I think both have found really powerful in JYCM, but also have seen it in other climate organizations, is recognizing where young people are coming from. We live in being Gen Z, I mean, we're extremely fortunate that we're a generation that really understands mental health and the fact that we are coming here as people with a lot of personal baggage and you come from your personal experiences, you come here with your familial experiences. As Jews, I think we really understand the weight of that, and we come as just young people in holding so many other collective identities that make it difficult to just show up on the daily, and then we just come as people in a really difficult world. And so to show up to this work with other people who understand and acknowledge and fundamentally want to talk about the way that this is difficult and it puts a strain on our mental health and is stressful amid all the things that college students do, makes it a transparent organizing scene. So when people come, and especially in JYCM we do this, but in lots of spaces, and say, I really need to take a step back for a few days or for a few weeks. I'm having this difficult thing. I'm having burnout. Burnout's really common. the way that I think we find is most productive is not to try to weasel not to try to undermine what they're telling us and push people to do more than they can, but to really honor what they're saying and say, absolutely, please take the time for yourself. And to hold that as not someone leaving, but as someone taking the time that they need to prioritize their well-being while still being part of that movement. So making the time to then still check up on people, to do one-on-ones. One-on-ones in relationship building are fundamental to maintaining involvement and retainment, and to check up on people and to be there for them as friends when they're going through difficult times. And then not only do you do that with your people individually behind the scenes when they're not showing up, but also having those conversations and strategizing as a full group, as a full organizing team, talking about what people might be dealing with alongside the climate organizing, talking about how the climate organizing itself might be causing burnout. Talk about how it's just freaking stressful sometimes to have papers and have social activities and be an activist. And making that really upfront in a community building affair makes people really feel bought into the movement and want to stay, because they know that there's no one strategy, there's no secret here. It's about coming up with what, at least in my opinion, up with what works and makes the most sense for your specific group. We have to talk about it.
That begs the question for each of the three of you as very strong organizers, how do you avoid burnout? Being the ones who are building the relationships with everyone, how do you keep track of yourself to avoid burnout? Or are you burnt out?
I think it's something that like kind of goes in and out. I think a lot of times during like a really intense period, I'll get like, overwhelmed or whatever it is, but having someone to talk to about it, I think that's kind of just applies to life in general. We all get overwhelmed with work and school and whatever it is, and it's kind of similar in that way. And also just with climate action, I think just like bringing myself back to like why I'm doing it in the first place, because I think it can get easy to like get away from what the original purpose is. If like planning the logistics of this thing and kind of making the slideshow for this thing, like it can get easy to get away from like, oh, like I'm trying to, educate, or I'm trying to like whatever it is for like my actual goal and how I'm helping, like that is what keeps me in this personally. And also like with JYCM, like we do a lot of like one-on-ones and relationship building, and we would have like fun calls, like a call like not for any planning, not for any action. We're just hanging out, talking, catching up, bonding calls. So I think those are like really important for any action movement organization, whether you're starting at the beginning or you're kind of already in it. That stuff has like probably been the most beneficial part of organizing for me.
Yeah, I think that it's really, really important as well to ask for help if you feel like you've taken on too much, or sometimes there's a long list of things to do and you think you could bang it out really, really quick, but it can get really, really exhausting. And know that you're not the only one doing this. There's plenty of people that are happy to take on jobs as well, and sometimes just directly saying like, "I can't do all of this. I need help." And yeah, that's also I think a really important thing to do.
So, switching gears a little bit here, I want to ask a really important question because this entire panel is about organizing on college campuses. But why is organizing on college campuses important, and what do you think makes it unique?
I
Yeah.
think that everything that happens at like college is a place for learning, like self growth, and developing our ideas that we're going to be taking into the world with us. So I think the really great thing about college campus organizing is that you have all of these young people coming from all sorts of different backgrounds and places, and they're going to be going to all sorts of different places as well. But you have them all together at one point, and you give them a shared goal, a shared kind of motivation. So I think that the values and the skills that people learn in climate organizing, they take with them throughout their life. And it's a really fantastic place to kind of start to, um, it's really nice to see people start to bake it into their life. And I really, really love that aspect of it.
I think it's also a matter of looking at the size of your audience. So at the very beginning, when I was talking about actions, I was talking a lot about power and institutions and how young people are aligned. And I love organizing, social movement theory. I totally like to nerd out over it. Bella and I have spent many hours developing trainings, attending trainings ourselves, co-training on things like organizing. And there are really just central tactics to how do you mobilize people? How do you shift the spectrum of support? You've got a certain number of people, and some of them are the movement, some of them are your opposition, some of them are your active allies, some of them are your passive allies, some of them are your active opponents, some of them are just neutral. But the cool thing about a lot of American college campuses, and I will not speak for Canadian college campuses, but I would hope that it's a bit similar, is that young people, Gen Z, campus age students, tend to be really knowledgeable generally and passionate already about the climate crisis. And especially among campus Jews, um, these are people who are by and large passive supporters of our movements. And so what we're trying to do is we don't have to spend as much time trying to make neutral people supportive of our cause. We have this base of people, and it's really just about that recruitment and activation, convincing people, yes, this is something that you have the power to change. There isn't necessarily as much of that education, that training that needs, there's not as much as that consciousness raising and education that needs to be done. It's more a matter of training people with the skills to take action. So I think in my experience, it's been about recruiting people to attend those trainings and organizing trainings. And that's what JYCM and Dayenu have been doing a lot of recently, working through with Hillel's to start these trainings on campus to get young people ready to take action. What does it mean to do advocacy? What does it mean to plan an action in a protest? What does it mean to sit in on your institutions and try to get them to divest or to organize in the local community? So we do a lot of this by talking to the people we know. These campuses are big spaces, but compared to the larger world, they are close knit, and there is a physicality to it. You're living around these people, you're interacting with them on the day to day. It's difficult during COVID, yes, but we can apply a lot of the same tactics to getting people there. And so it's also really cool because the power that we're often trying to shift is immediately right there. It's our own institutions, it's our universities, or else it's a local community that we all live in.
Yeah, I think what both you guys are saying is like really important. There's the aspect of like every student is coming in from all these different backgrounds, going to different places, and it's like one moment where everyone is kind of together to share what they know, what they want to know, like what they're passionate about, and kind of bring everyone together in that space. But also it's like an institution on its own that can be changed. Like for example, like Berkeley is a part of the UC system, and there's like the UC Green New Deal, which is like something that they're working on like through the whole system. So like change can happen, in Hillel, it can happen at Berkeley, it can happen through the whole system, and it's kind of also like a manner of like setting a precedent for your peers and like kind of talking about like, oh, I compost. It's like, oh, what's compost? Like kind of just talking to people, but also it can be on a bigger scale of like a Green New Deal. So it kind of like is an opportunity for both in a way.
So it's really awesome to be able to get that immediate feedback and see actual change going on. For both Madeline and or Bella, what was the transition from being a high school climate activist to then being a college climate activist like?
Um, it was a big transition, especially for me because it happened during the pandemic. Being a high school activist was all about that inner school relationships. And so it was far more difficult, I'll be honest, and in a great way. Hopefully those of you who are listening are thinking about or currently engaged in or preparing to be college activists, and I find it a lot more affirming because you have all those structures there. You have professors who are going to stand by you in ways that your teachers definitely do, but don't necessarily have as much power. And I organized in a really big city, so it was about finding people where you didn't necessarily have those connections. And I would say in college, where you might be trying to set up liaisons and recruit students from other schools. This is more recruiting students of other years and of other clubs and campus organizations, and there's just already that structure and that intimacy, so you don't have to foster it across wide spaces. You don't have to figure out. I grew up in a city that has unfortunately really inaccessible public transportation, and it's really dominated by cars, and that makes it really hard to organize because students are all in really far places and their parents are at work and they're at work, and it's really hard to get everyone in one place. In college, again, you're there, or if you're on Zoom, then you're not managing these weird odd hours. College students have more flexible hours. It's easier to go to a protest in the middle of the day because you might not have class. You very well might, but you don't definitely have class from 7:30 to 3:30 p.m. like you do in high school. It just, there is more flexibility, and for me it was weird to learn that. But in a harder, I adjusted quickly, and those were the great things. But there are also difficulties about it. I grew up, before I came to JYCM, before I came to college, really centered in a local community. For me, it was about, I am from this place, and in this place we have a shared story. So moving, it became really weird to be dislocated from that place that I came from, and that was where my organizing was based in. But then getting to do joining JYCM, it became an understanding of college organizing that was both because I was a college student and also because we had networks of young Jews in high school, in middle school, and absolutely in college, all organizing together. And the shared narrative was just something that we sought out again. So this time it was about what it meant to lose something to climate change because we were Jews, as opposed to because we lived in a certain place. But it ultimately came down to the same thing, about developing that shared sense of experience and celebrating the differences within that general experience.
Bella, do you have anything to add about the transition from being a high school activist to now a college activist?
Yeah, I mean, I like recently transitioned. I just finished my first semester of my freshman year, so I'm kind of still in that transition in a way. But something I have found is that in high school, a lot of times I felt like very powerless, like talking to my high school administration about, a climate strike that we wanted to do outside the front of the school. And in college, you have a lot more like mobility and power, and it's kind of just who you can gather to be there, less of like the hurdles you have to cross in a way. Like that's what I've experienced. And I've also just found a lot of really passionate people with a lot of more skill sets than I had in high school. And I think having that group of people to come together and kind of work on that, like if you're in high school now, like building those skill sets is so important. And talking to who you know and getting those climate strikes, like anything that you're doing is super important. And I found that in college, like everything I learned in high school is still applicable. Yet I think I agree with Madeline that it is easier in a way, because those institutions and those places are there for you to do it.
Emily, I wanted to ask you how the pandemic has impacted your personal climate advocacy, because I know it's something that's impacting everyone right now. Madeline touched upon how things have turned virtual, and Bella, during the transition to college, it's somewhat of this hybrid model. So, how has it impacted you in Canada?
It has completely shaped every single thing that we've done, and even us starting. So there's a really great and really strong climate movement that exists on campus already. Queens backing action on the climate crisis. But with the pandemic, we've got really, really strict rules up here, and we couldn't have any in-person university club activities. And so because of that, and because the existing climate movements in Kingston weren't really youth-oriented, we started in that backyard because we were trying to get involved, but there just didn't seem to be a lot of traction in the city already. I think that, so we got together and then we started to do it. And our work is kind of unique in the sense that we're all university students, we go to the same school, but we're not directly affiliated. And the huge advantage of that is that we don't have to follow university rules that other groups would be like are subject to. So we wouldn't have been able to do the things at the capacity that we've been doing them without having a lot of really great support behind the scenes from, for example, QBAC and, like I mentioned, the other orgs, 350, Kingston, and Just Recovery. But having the pandemic, it created a hunger to get involved that our group was able to satisfy, I hope. But also it's thrown us a lot of curveballs. For example, we had our September 24th global climate strike, and when we were putting that together, we had paid the police a whole bunch of money to supervise our march. We had gotten in touch with everybody that we thought we needed to get in touch with in order to make it a global climate march. We had built a wagon, we had a sound system, speakers at the beginning and end, and then 4 hours before the action at 10 a.m., we got a call from the police department, and they said that the march was canceled. And that we had to stay at the first location. So, that completely, we had to change our schedule and our plan and our speaker list. And we tried to troubleshoot it. So that caused a big problem. When we were lobbying right now for the change in the climate leadership plan, the day or two before one of our in-person rallies, outdoor gathering limits got reduced to something really, really small. And we wanted to be really COVID safe. So we at the last minute had to make it virtual. So it's been tricky working with the pandemic, but I think that it's been great being able to connect with people over Zoom. And we've still been able to have a really big impact, even working with local guidelines and a very sometimes quickly changing COVID situation.
Innovation is really truly the name of the game around here. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Audience, it has now come time to a question and answer portion. So if you have a question for our panelists, feel free to drop it below in the Q&A box, and I can ask our panelists those questions. We're going to start with this question of someone who has been a youth climate organizer in high school, but organizing from a Jewish standpoint in college just isn't necessarily working out due to how there's a lot of anti Semitism on campuses right now, and they're feeling left out of intersectional activism. And they want to know, have any of you run into any situations where you're not wanted as a Jewish climate activist, and how have you handled it?
I can answer this. We get the questions. We've been appreciating these questions in the Q&A section as a panelist. I've been looking at it for the last 20 minutes and appreciating it. We got a similar question last night on a different panel, and it's something that we think a lot about, especially as JYCM. How do we make a space that's specifically trying to integrate the fight for climate justice with the fight against anti-Semitism? And I think so many other communities that we are constantly in allyship with and are in this fight together with have done a really excellent job in connecting their identities and the fight for liberation for various communities, whether that's how feminist the climate movement is, or how young people of color are often fighting white supremacy and climate change at the same time, and white allies are absolutely doing the same thing, and needing it to be really together. And I think we haven't done that with anti-Semitism, and it's something that JYCM wants to do. For me personally, I never felt alienated at all, but I came from a city where we were on the front lines of the climate crisis, and the Jewish community in particular was experiencing it really hard. So there were tens of thousands of Jewish homes in the city of Houston that have been flooded in the last few floods. Nearly all of our major synagogues incurred really bad flood damage. Were out of their homes, weren't able to operate in their synagogues for a while. Even just your neighborhood Jewish bakeries and a bagel shop and a really nice family Jewish grocery store was ultimately put out of business. These places flooded, and it took a really big toll, and the JCC was shouldering the burden of it. And so I grew up, this was how I became conscious of this crisis. And then I came and I started doing activism in my city, but I wasn't necessarily feeling always so comfortable in showing up and telling that story of the community that really pushed me to do this, because I was kind of the only Jewish one who was doing organizing in our group. And finding JYCM was just this ability to express my whole identity. So it was this wonderful place, a really affirming and exciting place, because it could show this all together. But more and more, I'm starting to see not only is this a space to show up and to be a home for young Jewish activists who haven't felt like they've had a home in other parts of the movement. And I think the movement has been, in my experience, really inclusive. A lot of the national leaders of the climate movement, of the Gen Z climate movement in particular. I know sometimes the youth climate movement can be millennial and Gen Z, and I think some of those organizations that have older than Gen Z have been more of the problem. The Gen Z ones have been really affirming, and also have some really awesome Jewish leaders who we love to work with and have been mentors of mine. But thinking about how we can make them together, I was realizing the other day that the whole Jewish space laser thing of Marjorie Taylor Greene's, her accusation was that a space laser caused a wildfire. So, what does that really mean? It means that Jews are being scapegoated for climate change, which is fundamentally threatening our own communities and their existence. So, we know what it means historically to be scapegoated for problems. So, that's why I think it's so important that we show up as Jews and say, this is central to our traditions, to our well-being as a community, and to all communities everywhere. So that's why we're here in allyship. And so climate justice is about fighting anti-Semitism at the same time.
Yeah, that's all a really, really great point. Something that I do is I talk, like the Queen's Hillel has been extremely, extremely helpful with the work that the KYCA has been doing. Our youth climate movement, like our Jewish climate movement on campus, is still in the beginning steps. But yeah, as I said, the Hillel has been great. So whenever I talk about it, and I make sure to talk about it, I don't really leave any room for negativity. I say like, oh yeah, like this person from the Queen's Hillel has like been supportive in this way. And I like directly show like something positive, or I'll talk about the Big Bull Jewish Climate Fest and about how great that is. And yeah, just don't leave room for negativity as much. I guess that's easier said than done because I'm in a really positive and friendly space already. But yeah, I've just thinking that talking about it and talking about your Jewish identity is so important as well. And that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, I mean, on a personal level, I have not experienced that because I've mostly been organizing in Jewish spaces since, in high school. And I think for me, again, starting college, what is just so special to me about like organizing with Hillel is that at least at Berkeley Hillel, like they make sure to tell everyone it's a space for everyone. Like it is a Jewish space, but it is a space for everyone. Like I have some non-Jewish friends that are at Hillel more than I am. They come to events and stuff like that. And I think that's part of the Jewish movement as well, is this is a space for Jewish people, Jewish values, and our passions for the climate like justice, but in another way, like welcoming other people into this realm that we have like come to appreciate in our activism as well.
Thanks, everyone. So I think we have time for one last question. And it's how do you get involved with your local community just beyond your campus? I know, Emily, you've done a lot of that at Queen's.
Just start Googling and searching up on Instagram, send people DMs, or if you're out for coffee with a friend, ask if they have any leads if it's difficult to find. And yeah, just keep your ears open and see if you can, find something out by word of mouth. A movement that might have momentum. But Instagram is a great way to go if you see that there is a rally or an action going on. Show up or message the organizers beforehand and ask how you can be helpful. You really don't need to have a lot of expertise or knowledge to be an asset. So as long as you're willing to, show up with a good attitude and maybe do a little bit of work, it's really, really easy to get involved. And it's a great way to make friends.
Bella, Madeline, have you done anything in the Providence or Berkeley area beyond your school?
Uh, Um, yeah, I have been kind of looking for organizations around campus. Like we have like a food collective where people can come to get like, groceries that I just like volunteer at. And I think just like seeking out places around, I think they're pretty accessible, especially in COVID times. People are looking for a lot of help. Um, obviously the internet is a huge asset, but I think it's like who you know. Like if you meet someone that has, an opportunity, take them up on it. Like see who you can meet, who else needs help. Like kind of just meeting people and word of mouth is like a really good way to go about it. And I think also with JYCM, we have chapters, and KFUTSO is what they're called, similar to how Dayenu has chapters of youth. And there's a chapter in Berkeley that I'm working with to kind of talk to kids about it as well who are passionate. So kind of a range of different age groups as well, I think is something that can be interesting as well.
I think it's funny, Bella and I go to two universities that are maybe two of the most historically and famously progressive organization campuses, which is wonderful. I love it so much, and I'm really fortunate that the students at Brown are really knowledgeable about the activist and communal causes, and of course, being at a university that historically owned slaves and gentrifies its community and is on indigenous land. There are extremely historic problems there with it as a university, and so students come and they're really passionate about change, and they maybe have done a lot of organizing in their own communities and they want to get involved, and they're cognizant about the fact that there is power being affiliated with an institution that has caused so much harm. And so for me, it's been about, as really all the students there, trying to get involved in the community in a way that is letting the community lead. So we talk a lot about the power of youth activism, and that's so central. And yet when you go to a new place, it's really important to understand to have humility and understand that you aren't the leaders here when you are in the community, but you also are in partnership. And so Rhode Island is so awesome because it has done a lot of exciting environmental justice work and climate justice work, and they have these tremendous, really visionary, exemplary climate justice plans in Providence. And so I've been learning about them and seeing how I can get involved. And it's cool because at my school, there's a really big climate development lab, which is very activist, and they are policy oriented and research oriented, and they're within the university's academic program, but they are fundamentally really involved in the community, and they show up at public testimony at the city council, and they do all this stuff. So I've been able to make a lot of connections. And next, I'm excited to see how my work at JYCM also intersects with the local community, because we have a KFUTSO, we have a chapter in Rhode Island that recently planned an action. So getting to show up in support of them is really cool. And I know earlier today there was a session that our CEO at Hazon, Yakir Manella, led with the presidents of major Jewish federations who are doing great climate action. And I didn't know before this, but I found out that Rhode Island is doing an awesome job. They were on the panel. And so now I'm thinking, okay, how can I connect with the local Jewish community? So there's so many places, and it's complicated to do this in a place you're not from if you're not from there. And yet it's also really important too.
Thanks, everyone. That was a lovely note to end on. Thank you so much, Bella, Madeline, and Emily, for being our panelists. We're going to flash a slide on the screen so everyone can see different ways to stay connected to all of us and get involved. For Dayenu, you can join or start a Dayenu circle, which is a small group of people who meet every so often and take climate action together. We're all Jews who really care about making the climate crisis something better. You can also participate in one of our trainings in the future. We call them Taking Down Goliath. They are for 18 to 32-year-olds to learn climate organizing. And there should be another virtual training running later this year, and maybe even coming to a campus in a city near you. Finally, my email is always open, sumner@dayenu.org, if you have any questions about getting involved with us. And Madeline will tell you about how to stay involved with JYCM.
Yes, so JYCM has an exciting slate of both virtual, kind of just general training, educational programs coming up, and actual actions. So We have a virtual summit coming up in late March. We'll be training our typical climate activism series, where you'll learn about organizing, learn about telling stories and public narrative through even a Jewish lens, for those of you who are excited about that. You'll learn about political education and how to center equity and inclusion, how to fight environmental racism through environmental justice, and many other things. There may be some meetings, hearing from really powerful speakers in the community. That'll happen sometime in March. If you are not, please check our website out. It's at www.jewishyouthclimatemovement.org, and you can sign up for our listservs and stuff, or follow us on social media at Jewish Youth Climate Movement, and we'll be posting about it, so you'll get to find out about it when we finalize a date and have a sign up. And we also have a really exciting action opportunity that is just being launched in the next few days. For those of you who are excited about getting involved in something, in a big climate fight, because Passover is a big freedom holiday, or because it's during Earth Day and you want to do something Jewish and climate action oriented on Earth Day, there will be a massive slate of Earth Seders in the tradition of Freedom Seders, which were started by Rabbi Waskow during the Civil Rights Movement. Rabbi Arthur Waskow is a major environmental organizer, Jewish renewal, spiritualist, and progressive organizer since the 60s, and he is working with the Shalom Center and JYCM and Hazon to put on these Earth Seders combating climate finance injustice. So when big banks like Chase have investments in the fossil fuel industry. So we're going to have these really exciting seders all across this country. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in attending, or maybe planning, maybe you have no idea how to plan one but think it sounds cool, please reach out to me, and I would love to talk more and support you in the process, or just connect you to one locally that you can attend.
Thanks. Emily, did you want to plug anything for Kingston Community Alliance?
Yeah, feel free to follow Kingston Youth Climate Action on Instagram. We are probably going to be having more virtual rallies. And yeah, so if you follow, you can stay tuned and see what we're up to. Oh yeah, it's just right there at the bottom of the screen, Kingston Youth Climate Action.
Cool. Well, on behalf of all of us at the Bidwell Jewish Climate Fest, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We hope that you have a great night ahead of you and that you've learned something. Stay in touch, please. Thanks, everyone.